Students and educators should be aware that every month Epic Games gives away free marketplace content. If you go to the Epic Games launcher, the Unreal Engine section, there's typically news, and at the beginning of the month we announce the free marketplace content there. Also, if you go to the marketplace tile, the free for the month content packs are viewable in the start page. Additionally, in the marketplace tile, there's a free drop-down menu with a free for the month selection. There you can dig into each of the content packs and see what's available. This month you can see that there's a modern city downtown with interior content pack that retailed for $149. If you look at this content pack, you can see what's available and how valuable this content really is. You can see that it's a really highly rated pack that comes with a great many textures, materials, static meshes, decals, and even blueprints that are incredibly valuable for learning. I strongly recommend that you instruct students and even as instructors to go every month and download every one of these content packs, even if you don't need them. Someday down the future, they can be valuable as a learning resource or even as a teaching resource. Also in the free drop-down menu is the permanently free collection. The permanently free collection, as it states, is permanently free. Here you will find a variety of packs including vegetation packs, some content packs including broadcast studio, static meshes, skeletal meshes, effects packs, and some of my favorites including the super grid and the locomotion, advanced locomotion system. These are amazing projects that once again can be really valuable as a learning resource, but also can be super valuable as students work to stub out levels, do gray boxing, a bit different types, or even just need maybe a water plane or some wood materials or things to help build out environments for their capstone projects. Also in the free menu is the Epic Games content. These are additional material packs, full projects including all of the Infinity Blade content, additional plugins that can be helpful for media and broadcast, but really importantly is the entire suite of Paragon characters and environments. This is also an incredibly valuable learning resource because each character inside of Paragon was beautifully created with amazing materials, stunning animations, effects, and audio work, and all of this content can be used even to ship games inside of Unreal Engine. Make sure you check out this content, learn from it, use it in classrooms to teach and to learn. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's stream. We are really honored to have this week Mario Palmero and Sjoerd de Jong. And we are excited because this week we get to focus on something that I think that we've been looking forward to, which is the Kickstart project, which is exploring the anatomy of Unreal Engine. As usual, we have Tom Shannon joining us and Mark Flanagan, who have been with us for the last couple of education streams. They will also be in the chat helping to answer questions. But for those of you who maybe don't know, Sjoerd is the lead evangelist, and Mario is an evangelist in currently based out of Spain, and they've been working together in basically in the European regions, just basically traveling around. You know, Tom and Mark and I, Mark is also in Europe, have the privilege and pleasure of kind of traveling around and working to spread the wealth of Unreal Engine. Tom and Mark and I work primarily focused in applications. And I've worked with Sjoerd for a long time. And Mario, how long have you been with us, Mario? Maybe a couple of years now.
Already a year and a half. Yeah.
A year and a half. Fantastic. And I think that it's fantastic to get to travel around and work Epic and visit studios. But Sjoerd and I have had the privilege of traveling around. We traveled around Italy together, and we've worked together for quite some time. Sjoerd has been working Unreal Engine probably. A great story that I have is that I worked in a studio back in the early 2000s, made games in Unreal Engine 3. And back in Unreal Engine 3, when I was learning Unreal website, learn Unreal Engine 3. So I've been learning from Sjoerd for a long time. And I think probably most of us stories similar to that. So it's a real treat and privilege to be on the stream with Sjoerd. Um, take a moment and say hello and introduce yourselves. Sjoerd, say hello.
Hello.
That's Sjoerd.
Yeah, it's very nice to be here. Thanks for having us. So indeed, we're going to talk about the Kickstarter content that we've been building over a number of months. As Lewis mentioned, I've been using Unreal for about 20 years-ish, since 1999. I've done Unreal Engine 1, 2, 3, and now 4. I'm primarily on the content side. So I'm not a programmer, but anything that's content focused and not skeletal meshes, which is everything Mario does. So we're a perfect couple.
Perfect. And Mario, please say hello and tell us a little bit about your background and do with Epic and brought you here and before coming to Epic. Do.
Sure. Hi. My name is Mario Palmero, and I've been a gameplay programmer for almost a decade already, and also a bit on animation, technical artist stuff. And yeah, I've worked in diverse range of companies that focus on games. And I'm the evangelist for the southern west region, France, Portugal, Spain.
That's awesome. So I think one of the things that's really amazing is that we get to travel around and visit a lot of studios, and we get to talk to a lot of people about Unreal Engine in general. And I think that as we approach studios and as we approach academic institutions and as we approach people about learning Unreal Engine, it's kind of been always a challenge to sort of take the whole engine and sort of say, well, this is Unreal, right? Um, Especially with people that come from their own bespoke game engines, that come from other commercial game engines, and it's always been a challenge. I remember visiting studios with Sjoerd throughout Europe when we've traveled together, and we would sit in trains and talk about how to approach this. And I know that working with Tom and working with Mark as we go to universities, and maybe we'll go into an animation program, or we'll go to a game development program, or we'll go to a visual effects program. Talk about, well, how do you look at Unreal? What is the programming side of it? What is the game development side of it? What is the world building aspects? Or how do you sort of look at it as a whole? And so um, I heard about this Kickstart project, I don't know, a couple years ago when I think that Sjoerd and Mario and a couple of the evangelists in Europe started saying, well, we need some kind of a tool to be able to go to studios and uh, and be able to show the big picture to everyone, so that we can explain things without having to use just words, right? Can you give us a little bit of background, Sjoerd and Mario, sort of what motivated the development of what you're going to share with the group today?
I think it probably comes from a couple of different directions. How do you train people in Unreal? How do you explain something that's as complex and as wide as Unreal? Normally and typically what everyone will always do, and there is definitely a need for that, but typically people go in the normal tutorial direction, as in here's a series of steps you're following, you click here, you click there, you click there, and then you have result X. That tends to be the normal way to go. And that is great, but it tends to show you that specific path to accomplish that specific result. And then as you're learning that, you just end up doing the next video or the next tutorial and the next one and the next one, the next one. And so you've done all these independent paths forward. You get to an end goal, the next one, end goal, end goal, end goal. And what we wanted to do with this content was to take the bigger picture, like to take the overview. So you don't feel like you're just taking this isolated path forward and then you have to stitch that together with the next tutorial you're doing or the next class you're doing, and you have to stitch that mentally together with the next one. And especially in an engine as complex as Unreal, where you have a lot of features, a lot of tools, a lot of learning resources as well. How do you see, we have a saying, I think it's the same saying in English, how do you see the forest through the trees or something, right? And that's what we try to overcome, to create that kind of large-scale schematic. This is the engine, bird's eye perspective.
Yes, and also we were trying to address a problem, because when you're a veteran developer, but you don't want a step-by-step tutorial, because what you want is, okay, something that I already know how to do with other technologies, how I do it with Unreal, where I have to look for it, instead of a step-by-step and understanding techniques and sets. Because what you want is to find out where that system that you already know, how it's mapped in this new technology that you are approaching.
And it also ties into the way that I've learned Unreal. I mean, when I started, there was nothing. And I think that might be an interesting world to consider for a lot of people who are, newer to all of this. When I started, there was no Google. I mean, I think it was Google, and it was a small-scale website. There was no Facebook. There was no YouTube. There were no books on game development. There were no educations, at least not in where I was in Europe. There was basically nothing. So you want to learn this stuff. The way that you did it, and the way that everyone did it from that time, is you just click around, you experiment, you ask people, and you figure it out somehow. And that was a different mindset. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's a different mindset. And for me, I still never, even up to today, I never follow a tutorial. I just look for hints, and then I will try myself. And that's my way of learning. And that's a way of learning where it goes slower sometimes, because you're just trying things out, but you're not just learning the one correct way, which is what you're normally being taught. You also learn all the wrong ways because you're just experimenting. And so the content that we build is not just about all the stuff we said before about the overview and all that. It's also kind of fits into that teaching mentality. Like, instead of telling people exactly what to do, let's start with a really large picture and give them an idea what they can experiment with and try, and then stimulate that kind of directions.
Well, let's take one step back. What I want to share with you all on the stream is that if you go to learn.unreal.com, which Tom shared in the chat, you can find on our online learning an entire learning path, which is basically about 8.5 hours that Sjoerd and Mario and let me step one step back and say that I never say Sjoerd correctly. It's actually Sjoerd. I keep saying Sjoerd,
That's
but
still not correct.
yeah, I know, but I will never say it right. So I'm going to ask for a pass and say that I'm never going to say it right, because yeah. But anyway, um, there's an entire learning path that's about 8.5 hours of recorded content that basically covers all this material. That's this incredibly wide bird's eye view of Unreal Engine, covering multiple. We're going to get in a few these systems are and how to get them, explore them yourselves, and dig into all this content that we're talking about. So, we're going to make sure that we cover this material, but be clear that you can go there right now. And as we're talking about this stream, you can go and look at it yourself and see what you get to go and learn, because it's all exposed to you. And there's complementary material that is being developed, and we're going to get a little sneak peek at some of the content that will be exposed to you in the coming months, or whenever it's in the oven right now. So, having said that, can you talk a little bit about some of the systems that are covered? Because, as you all know, those of you who are already working in Unreal Engine, it's a very wide tool set. As you approach talking about the anatomy of Unreal Engine, this bird's eye view, what is covered inside of this?
You mean the 8 subjects, right?
Yes.
Yes. So we started off with the 8 that we felt were the most common or fundamental. We definitely didn't cover the whole engine yet, but so the 8 we have right now are engine structure. And engine structure means basically the engine itself, the folder structure, the way there's an engine and there's a project, and there's assets somewhere, and there's plugins and all of that kind of stuff. And you have to build. You have to, first of all, get the source code somewhere. You have to build the engine. You have to distribute that to the team. That whole process becomes engine structure. And importantly, also to that is the build process. Build as in building the game. So cooking, packaging, building, and so on. So that's one. Secondly, we've got Blueprint, which we're going to take a brief look at in a bit. We've got materials, we've got rendering, we got world building, and Mario, you can continue with the ones on your end.
Animation, programming. Well, animation, we again, it's always an overview of the systems. Animation is quite straightforward. Programming also, but we also have character that involves a bit on AI input, our own gameplay framework, even how that animation, so anything that a character may when you're implementing an application. And I think that's all, right?
I think we got to 8, yeah. I think. I can't do math, I'm an artist, so I think it's 8.
And so what was the
8's a good
process,
number.
you know, that you, because that's a tremendous amount of content, you know, who all was involved in developing this content?
So primarily we as the evangelist team, so we're 6 people in Europe. Me and Mario have been mostly focused on it, but we got help from the whole team. So Andreas, Josef, Christoph, Aaron.
Yeah, and so, you know, it's clear that that team is very technical, but, you know, and having spent 20 years in Unreal Engine, clearly you get up pretty wide. And I know that, Sjoerd, you've made games and released games in Unreal Engine, but you know, I've been working in Unreal for a long time, but you know, I couldn't even imagine how you approach a project like this where you're digging into all of animation, all of blueprint programming, you know, and all the systems covered there. How do you approach a project like this and then validate that much? How do you do that?
We started off with a few different ideas. I mean, we started off with the idea we wanted to do an onboarding for experienced developers in Unreal without falling into the traps of just doing click here, click there kind of work. And then we tried a few different things. Some of it didn't work out. We, in the beginning, tried to do a really almost a comparison for, you know, if you're in Unreal and you're used to this kind of thing, this is what it's called in Unreal. So it just becomes like a list, like a property panel or whatever you want to call it. This kind of thing here. This is this. So it becomes like a glossary maybe, or whatever you want to call it. That was really dry. Didn't really work. So we cut a lot of that. And then just thinking that over again, what we really want to do, again, experienced developers was the original core audience. I do think the content we have works for everyone at this point, but originally we started off with the core being experienced developers. What do they really look for? And what they really want to know is they want to know things like the terminology. What is stuff called in Unreal without just having a dry, you know, comparison, picture-to-picture comparison. And they want to know, you know, how things relate to each other and what the options are available that are in the engine, so they themselves can figure out, this is what I want to look for, this is what it's called, this is how it relates to each other, so this is what I should learn first. And so that's, at that point, we realized we need to do large schematics. Don't go too deep into the, like, you know, descriptions on the schematics, really focus on the schematic part of it.
Can you show us some of the schematics? I know that you show them the chat, I mean, in the actual videos. Will you share us some of the schematics?
Sure, let me share my screen and let's see if that works. You gotta tell me if that works.
Yep.
Okay, and it's gonna get on the stream, yeah. So hold on, just taking a few things away. So what we have right now is, so this is the original source schematic that we've been working on. I'm going to show you the final ones because we're restyling them. Okay, so this is just our version. In fact, let's start with, for example, materials is relatively straightforward. It's a bit simpler. So we got these large-scale images. We actually have a summary version here at the bottom, but skip over that for now. And we can zoom in. They're divided in like boxes of colors, like categories. These, I would say, for a material, for example, these are the core authoring tools. So basically the material editor itself, but textures feed into that. If you look at what textures means in Unreal, there's the texture samples with the actual that hold textures. The textures are being imported. There's texture properties, there's texture groups. We support streaming virtual texturing, texture streaming in general that has a streaming pool that comes in, a render target, there's compression at hand there, a derived data cache and therefore a shared derived data cache. And so it kind of tries to map everything out. It doesn't necessarily cover every single thing in Unreal. We're aware there's a few things missing that are very specific, but it covers the large bulk of it, of everything that's kind of there, and all the major things for certain. At some points shaders are compiled, for example, here in the yellow stage. Materials are used in different parts of the editor. For example, you can use them in a decal, etc., or in UI. And so all of that is covered over here, some performance tools. That's what this looks like. We've done that for everything. We've done that for world building, done that for programming. And we've got character over here. Blueprint, which we'll take a look at in a second. And what else do we have here? Rendering, and engine structure. Does that. So again, big picture, literally a big picture overview of Unreal.
So one of the reasons that I really was passionate about this particular stream is because in looking at these schematics alone and this content, I thought this incredibly valuable as a teaching, of course, as a learning resource. But if it was my job tomorrow, start teaching materials, world building, programming, blueprints in a classroom, looking and having the ability to get a schematic like this and understand how the flow of logic worked in any one of these systems, see that something like this would be valuable. Is it set up in that way specifically? I mean, were these designed to think about them as logic flow side of these systems, or talk a little bit about that? Is that how it works, or are the relationships real in that way?
I think so. And Mario, feel free to cut in when you want
sure,
to, because I just keep on talking typically. But yeah, absolutely. If you go to materials, which again is fairly straightforward, I think it's fairly simple structure of lines. It definitely shows you where it starts, because it starts with the HLSL files this stuff comes from. It definitely shows you then you have the core material editor itself, but the material editor would then eventually be supported by these things like material functions, which are not essential, but they're supportive in nature. Material instances that actually come a little bit later in the process because they first have to be compiled. So yeah, it definitely shows you the relationship between things. It shows you the order. And if you know the order, then that might be very useful, I think, in teaching, because obviously it helps you to identify what should be taught first.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps what is most central. Maybe you can say, well, material editor itself should be taught first, because that's clearly the most central thing in here. Or this, we should start over here. Depends on what kind of approach you want to take.
So you've got the arrows that give you the actual
usually
flow.
it shows flow of work or process, but also it can mean dependencies or connections between systems. So we use them as for those both purposes.
I mean,
one of the things
really
I love about this is it does give you that overview, and quite often when we're teaching Unreal, we're teaching a very small section of it, and you just see that. You don't know where it relates. So that's a way that we can learn a certain amount of skills, but to be able to actually see where things fit together gives you an understanding. And if you understand how something works, you don't forget it.
Yeah. So, something related to that is that, for example, when I was in the high school, sometimes I didn't understood some bits on maths or physics because I didn't understand why I needed to know that. And this gives you that picture that you were talking about.
Yep.
I think it's very important for that to have a big picture of what you're learning, what is good for, or what are you going to do.
Absolutely.
And also to know where to go next. Sometimes you want to go to know what is rabbit hole. Or sometimes you want to go shallower. I know HLS. So helpful to have that.
Yep.
That. Be able to see all of these. components. Because yeah, I mean, this is just materials. This is the simple one. Tough. Material is so big and has.
Yep. I think it answers an awful lot of the why questions, because we can show people how very easily within the engine. But why things are being done is something which is hard to explain just when you're actually making a thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I think you can say there's three different things in here. There is the order in which things happen, which is important for if you're teaching this. It categorizes things together, like basically the colors or the categories, which is important. And I think it's the terminology and the naming conventions, and in general highlighting what things might be called, things you might forget. For example, oh, right, there was something called a material domain. Now I remember. And it's pretty important, it seems, because it's in here as a special note. And oh, that's what it's called in Unreal, that kind of stuff. So those three things, I think, is what it delivers.
So there's lots of people sort of asking about these schematics. You are redeveloping them and they're going to become available.
Yes, they're being restyled. In fact, here's a work in progress one of the new style. So nicer looking. And we're waiting for that to be done. And to my understanding, that would then go online once this work has been done. So this is basically the same, but it looks nicer. Again, this is work in progress. The text is the same everywhere, as you can see, but that's what we're going for.
Yeah, also, we try to keep them updated. I don't know how the process is going to be for that, because yeah, with the new releases, new system, the engine, one of the pieces of that process that you were asking about, how did we gather all this information, was going through the release notes, checking if we were covering everything.
It's been a good exercise for ourselves as well, because even if you know the engine, once you start trying to map it out, you really have to think it through again. Like you really have to try to, okay, does this actually make sense? Like what thing is actually where in this order? And that was an interesting exercise. Plus, at some point you realize, oh, I don't actually know that one particular thing there very well. I know it's there. I know what it does. I've never tried it myself. I don't know how to place this in this big schematic. So we've learned a few things left and right as well. So it was interesting to do.
Yeah, these are incredibly valuable, super helpful. Can we take a look at another one?
Yes, let's see. Any
A little more
preference?
detail.
Sorry, what?
How about the blueprint one? What do you think about the blueprint? Everyone loves blueprints.
Lost blueprint. Okay. Here's what we have for blueprints. In fact, we can take a look at the summary here. You could say the summary kind of looks like this. And again, a lot of these schematics are up for discussion. You could have argued, well, that one particular thing there should have been there, but you know, we've made certain decisions on how to place this. But you could say in Blueprint, for example, there is obviously C++ is a very central, big part of it. So big orange blob, C++, then Blueprint itself, and then Blueprint in turn is going to be used in a lot of different parts of the engine. So I think those are the three major parts of this. It's majorly important also that it's inheritance based, and eventually it will have to compile. I think those five are the major central pillars of how this works. And then you have all kinds of stuff that floats around it. You've got framework classes that come into C++, and through that, therefore also towards Blueprint. Replication is built in everywhere. There's data features, additional features in general from Blueprint, which are clarified in the large schematic. You can use for editor scripting even. I thought that was important to mention, so people are aware of that. And Blueprint itself, you could say there's a timeline, there's components, and there's core BP tools, Blueprint tools, which is essentially everything else. This is greatly simplified over here. There's also a lot to say about Blueprint to Blueprint communication. There's many different ways of doing that. And there's some debugging and performance features. So that's kind of the summary, which in the large image then translates to about this. Where we see similar kind of things. You got Blueprint on, C++ on the left. It has inheritance. A number of replication there as well. Here are framework classes. These are essentially, as it says at the top, core C++ features or concepts supporting blueprints in how it works. There's events, functions, and variables that are C++ defined, is what we mean with that, not events, functions, and variables defined in Blueprint that are feeding into Blueprint. There's function libraries, which are again C++ defined, not the Blueprint ones. There's data features that I mentioned a second ago, which means data tables, data assets, and curves, which can feed both into C++ or used by C++ or Blueprint. And that's basically how it carries on. You've got the core over here. Core would mean but the event graph, the construction script, the components are the obvious ones, but they in turn exist out of many of the I think this is pretty straightforward, this one, but there's macros, there's functions, there's variables, event dispatches, there's a timeline, and replication is everywhere. Right? And if you then look at the bottom where we have additional features, these are basically all the additional things Blueprint can do. They're not essential, you don't have to use them, but they're there and to highlight their existence. So child actors, Blueprint components, what we mean with that one is you can, in fact, I can try to zoom in on the picture. You got this actor and scene components, because technically all of it, a lot of these things you can add are components, but specifically to create a component within Blueprint, you can add to another Blueprint that holds some of the functionality. Function libraries and macro ones defined in the editor, and highlighting you can use of editor scripting, which can be done in 3 different ways. You got utility objects, action utilities, and the widgets. Okay. I mean, just actually on this, because this is basically the old utility stuff. We changed that a while ago, and a lot of people are not aware there's actually 3 different categories of editor scripting through Blueprint. So just mapping data out already for me was useful as well. Make that differentiation. So yeah.
So would you say
Yeah,
that
this is this when Lewis and I visit school, or when we're trying to introduce Unreal to anybody, it's always a real struggle to kind of encapsulate all the things. So just in blueprints alone, even if we're given classroom, it's near impossible just to get through a fraction of it. Because most of the time you're talking about what these relationships are, and one thing leads to another and another, and there's just so many. One of the real challenges in Unreal, for myself, learners, and even for professionals who have been using it for years and years is, and especially as it gets bigger and keep adding more stuff and cooler, and it's really hard to even know now what you don't know. So if you can't see all of the pieces, uh, sometimes you don't even know that you don't know that something's there, and by knowing it, go learn. And seeing something like this, me at least, back in my, like, oh, I remember seeing that thing and reading that little 1 sentence thing, and I remember Unreal can do that. I can go back and have that. Hopefully, my voice is.
so? There's one thing that I wanted to ask you specifically about looking at something like this, these schematics, is there's other Blueprint videos or online. Can I look at something like this, or there's plenty of other material courses? What I can sort of see here is that I can look at these schematics and say, well, this is where this course fits in, and this course fits. I think that this is a nice, helpful, big picture, kind of complements a lot of the other learning that sort of sits in small pockets of mathematics. I think that it's helpful because uh, nothing sort of addresses all of the materials in any other course, and all of Blue course, or even on YouTube, right? You can go on YouTube and find a little piece of this, a little piece of that, and a little piece of the other. But I think the issue is that it doesn't tell you that this little, tell you that that little. and it can be very difficult to understand that you're looking at. I think one of the things that really helpful when I looked at these schematics is helped me to the big picture, what else I need to rock, and how to get my head around blueprint in general, right? How to get my materials and how to get my and then even as a teacher, I had to teach a class on blueprint materials. I knew deliberately that I wasn't going to be able to cover it all in a couple of hours. So what do I want to focus on? What do I want to overview, dig into? So, what if you're addressing this particular group here, the people that teach students, what would you say? How would you encourage them? Material about the
Well, I would say that the best thing that this overview can do for students is to let them know what it already is inside the engine, and then you can focus on. I mean, this is almost everything, or the most important things that we have in the engine. We can't cover all of these in a year, 2 years, 3 years, but letting the student know that that already exists is what you said. You store that at the back of your head, and in the moment that you need, you will be able to go back and experiment with it. So I will say that just showing the students what is already available in the engine. What do you think, Sjoerd?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing you can use this for is to provide structure. You could say, well, let's just go back to the material one. I think it's slightly easier. You can say, today we're going to talk about material functions. Tomorrow this one, or next week this one. Basically these are the same. The week after maybe that one. But you can basically lay out the classes and show them visually. So here we are, then we're going to be there, then we're going to be there. So it defines the rhythm of what you're teaching,
Yes.
on the daily, weekly, or whenever you're teaching it. Yeah.
And also, again, giving context of what systems run the one that you're teaching right now. So you understand why the lesson that you're giving is so important, and how it ties together with the rest.
And it shows people where the end is, so they can see, okay, so we've done that, we've done this, now we're like halfway in, we still have to talk about this in the future. So again, I think that's interesting.
And it's nice. You can cut whatever you're not going to cover, or you think it's useless. Of course.
Perfect. So you've got, as you present this material, you actually go into Engine during the course and actually demonstrate some of these systems and how they apply. Would you like to share some of that content inside of Engine?
Yeah. I have a tendency to move very fast in the viewport, by the way, which doesn't work on streams, but I'll try to hold myself back. We took the Sun Temple sample project, and we've added a lot of stuff in it. So it's a very simple game. I've tried to play the game. That probably doesn't hold up very well on the stream. It's a very simple game. We took a Paragon character, you can walk around. There's enemies that can spawn. You have some magic you can shoot them with. It's very, very, very simple. But what this project now does is that it has a bit of almost everything. Not everything entirely, but say 80–90% of what's in all the different schematics is in this project. So we've added an outdoor section to it. There's all kinds of smaller examples. For example, the statue over there is an H-slot example with very aggressive culling, just to make it more visible. There's fog, there is sky in here, there is all kinds of stuff we've done with Blueprint. You can see the blueprints here at the bottom that we've set up, C++ underneath
Just
that.
had to put in the volumetric sky, didn't you?
Yeah, well, actually, this one is not, but you can technically hide this one, etc., etc. But yeah. But yeah, so it's a very small sample game, very simplistic sample game, but it has an example of everything. example, this shadow is different than the shadow over there, which is different from the shadow over here. So again, it's an example case for almost everything. Made a small pool of water, it has post-process effect underneath, has water caustics. There's some example glass here, and dirty glass, etc., etc., etc.
You're only talking about art.
I'm sorry.
You also
that's
have
the important part.
Behavior trees. You have environment query systems. You have schematics. All of like the main systems that you can find in.
Yeah, so we've set up basic cinematics. So essentially the example of everything that is touched on in the schematic, almost everything. So indeed, so go back to blueprints indeed, the way the character has been set up. It's opening. So you got over here, character itself. Indeed, if you look at will flow with the animation blueprint indeed, and so on, and so on, and so on. So yeah, that's our project. So during the class, we will alt-tab back and forth. We actually also have a number of slides. They're mostly there to provide structure to the topics we're touching on. For example, it divides it up in these categories, basically the colors as seen in the schematic, and it talks us through the different parts of it. And so we alt-tab between schematics, the slides, and the project.
Yeah, the origin of the course was meant to deliver this in 2 studios. We visit one studio and we deliver the 8 topics. It takes around a day, 8 hours, an hour per topic. And yeah, using both using the schematic, the slides, and also the project to cover all the content.
And so what we typically do is a topic comes up. Let's just take a random thing here. Material functions, and then we would bring up a material that has a material function very quickly. So we quickly alt-tab to the editor. We quickly open up a random material that has a function. In fact, I think I made a small example area here for some material stuff. One of these has functions. I think there's some furniture here somewhere that I took from one of the packs. These are material layers. It's fine too. We just open up the material and we quickly show, okay, so this is what it actually looks like in real life in the editor. This is what it meant. And then we move on. So you also get a feeling for, right, okay, it's cool that I can see this in the schematic, that this thing is here, it's named like that, but that doesn't tell me that much in itself here, right? But if you can quickly see in the editor, you gotta click on the material, or you gotta click there in the interface, and then it looks like this, and it's named like that, you're gonna get a lot more familiar with the idea of what it really is in reality.
Well, and this is the way that I've always learned is, I can see some stuff and hear some stuff, but if I can get my hands on it and change some stuff and break it and then try and fix it, then I really get an understanding of it. So for me, as my type of learner, I guess I'm like forensic style learning. I'll get in there and really see like how it's working. So having all of these different components, dual component, having it explained, explaining on the online learning platform, having these resources. So it kind of approaches all the different ways of learning. And so by the time you've got to this point, concepts are free, and you have something to fall back on again when you're scratching your head, even 6 months down the road, where you're like, I think I learned a thing about a material layer once. Be nice if I could just pop that open and use it and start from there. That's such an amazing resource. So well connected.
And it gives you that feeling where to actually find it in here. And so if you want to have that original, way of learning that I had when I started, where basically you experiment with things, then what you need to have is you need to be given a hint. Look in this direction, and this does that. This gives you the hint. Look in this direction. Here is where it lives, and then you can start experimenting with that. Or as a memory aid, maybe you've gone through tutorials and classes on, for example, material layers. You did forget where it actually is. This quickly shows you how to go back to there, and then hopefully all your memories come back on how to actually use it, or you start experimenting. That kind of flow.
So one of the places that a lot of people get confused is programming. Well, you all attempted to work in that area as well.
Yes,
Mario,
we did. Yeah. There is a problem with programming because it's huge. I mean, everything that you can see is based on programming. Even the materials, even all the systems are programming. But to kickstart people that already know how to do games into Unreal, what we try to approach are two main things. Well, three things. If you can go to the schematic overview, sure.
Which one?
Programming. There are three main things here. One is the process of working with C++ and at the end building the game. That will be that main road that we can see. Go to the big one.
I was trying to
That
help
will
you.
be the horizontal orange line will be that. Like how you set up your environment to work C++, how you feed that into, like how you build source code, and then how you compile, how you work with the editor, and then how people can build a final game. That will be one of the main pillars of the programming. The other one will be like the base types that you have to know to really get your hands on the code and happening. That will be understand very basic types like arrays, strings, sets, but then understand the object and the actor relationship and what's the lifetime of those two pieces, how you can create them, and what you can do with them. And then the third pillar will be the big systems that we already have in place. That is the ones at the top. Our gameplay framework that is huge. It's already like we always talk about the Unreal way of doing things, and this is the main pillar of the Unreal way when we are talking about programming. In understanding why we have a controller, why we have a pawn character, and how they work together, where to put your features and your functionality when you're creating gameplay, all that. But also we have our garbage collection system, our streaming system, our working system, and all those very broadly explain are that third pillar, those systems that we already have and how you can use them. So basically, Kickstart program was always like the things that we would have we wanted to know when we started using Unreal. And for me, programming was even if I am a programmer, for me it was the most difficult one because it's so broad that it was a challenge to put all together. And even now, I want to redo some things and iterate on this, but at some point you have to say, okay, we're going to work with that, and we will keep working on it.
That's amazing.
That's what they're saying in the chat.
Everyone wants the graphs.
I know. I want to share the graphs, but we need to wait until these are ready, it seems.
Yeah.
You come on our stream and tease us with your amazing graphs.
But it will happen. It will.
Well, it's great that we all are just quarantined and have 8.5 hours that we can sit around and watch these videos, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I finished
And then
Netflix.
you'll want those graphs even more.
And we can get badges.
And the content.
Get badges. We need badges. We need stinking badges. Another one that I think was really good is the animation one. Animation relationship of all the different animation stuff in the also a fair spider web.
We had a lot of fights with this one.
Yeah.
Sure.
I had my ideas.
Yeah, he had his ideas, and at the end we debate a lot, and we came into this agreement. So what we have in animation, at the end, animation, the main thing to know is that the pillar is a skeleton. Like everything is tied to a skeleton, and that's why I wanted to have it in the center. Sjoerd didn't allow me to do that. He wanted to, perhaps.
I wanted to show the flow, how the different major parts of it are there.
I know, I was just kidding. But yeah, it then divides in two parts. Okay, one is you work with animation sequences. That is like the small little pieces, and then you feed those. Well, you can transform all those and feed those in the anim blueprint. And the anim blueprint is separated in two parts. That is the anim graph and the event graph. But I didn't want it to give the event graph a big blob like the anim graph, because the event graph is only a connection with the gameplay framework, and everything that is at the end animation will be in the anim graph. So for me, that a big pillar of that. And as I said, in the project, in the moment that you open a character, you will see that having a skeleton, you can have several skeletal meshes, you can have several animation blueprints, you can have a lot of animation sequences, and even different physical assets. But you only have one skeleton for all of them. And that was what I wanted to represent. But also we wanted to, as Sjoerd said, we wanted to show the flow of how do you work, how do you import an FBX, and then how do you separate that in several pieces, and then how do you tie them together.
But it's a challenge in itself to map this out. As you can see, the discussions there, and even now looking at it, or looking at any of the other ones, there is always something where like Mario, I'm looking at state machine. Shouldn't the different conditions and things be here as nodes?
No, I don't think so, because condition. It's again what is the granularity of it? But in the moment that you get into state machines, it's not that deep. I mean, it has. I prefer to have the overview cleaner, and let the person that is looking at it then get deeper and deeper, because I don't think that anything inside a state machine is going to be a system. So I don't want to show anything that is not a system. Okay. But again, a lot of fighting about how to do this.
So I think one of the things that we talk about when we visit schools is that, you are coming from other engines. You don't have to build a lot of systems in Unreal, because Unreal holds a lot of systems. You don't have to write. I think that this is an amazing big picture into that. You don't have to build a lot of these systems. They're already here, and this is a great way to be able to see that. If you're coming from another engine, you have to develop a lot of this. Be able to see it already exists. Huge deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we've noticed as well when we've done this with studios using currently another engine, and you go through the schematics for them. I guarantee you they're going to say, "Oh, you got that? I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool. We spend a lot of time building that ourselves at the moment, and that's really cool to see."
A lot of woes and nots.
So once again, from a teacher's perspective and an instructor's perspective, to be able to know that and be able to see that exists, is to be able to review this and not go reinvent the wheels is a big deal.
And I think when you get into Unreal in the beginning, it's the Unreal way. There is a certain set way or an expectation of how you should be working. That's based on our many years of experience and all the experiences that we've seen with the many game developers using Unreal. So there is a certain set path, right? And one of the struggles I sometimes see people have when they're new to Unreal is to accept that way of thinking. Like people tend to want to develop their own systems, or they don't know what's already there. And this helps with that. It helps show this is what's really here. And
mainly for programmers, I can tell. I did that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
tried
absolutely.
to forget about everything that was already there and do my thing. You can do it, but it's not advisable. And it's good to have a tool to talk to say why it's not advisable. And this is what goes one tool to.
Yeah, there's nothing more painful than someone who's put forth a studio or a student put forth all this effort to create this amazing new system in Unreal, and you're like, whoa, you're like 5% of the way of this thing that was already there already. And they just didn't know it was there, and so they just figured, especially coming, there's a lot of folks, students in programs and people professionally who are used to always having to make their own, you know, from bespoke engines or built their own engines. So just their initial reaction when they encounter a problem, they're like, oh yeah, I'll make my own. And yeah, because of all of the work that we've put into complexities of the underpinning, we've already done it. Probably going to be a little more robust. And the worst part is that that's time and energy spent towards a goal that I'm gonna have to tell them, sorry, it's already done.
I think my
Did
core
it.
philosophy, and I would say that same goes for Unreal, is always you should spend your time on making it fun, or making it pretty, or making it good, whatever, not on making it work. It's a very important difference. The making it work step should be like 5% of the time, so you can spend 95% of the time on polishing it, iterating on it, improving it, really nailing exactly what you want to do, but not to make it work. And a lot of people fall in that trap, I think.
I'm thinking from the perspective of some of my friends who are programmers. I have friends and they are programmers. This makes a great difference to them as well, because they can see what's there and they can see if they want to make a change, what it's actually going to be hooking into, where it's coming from, where it's going to. And that's something which would take a lot of experience to do without this kind of map for them.
And you see that with Blueprint too, because Blueprint is one where that often comes up. Like people think Blueprint is separate from C++, or they don't understand how intertwined these two are, and how in turn, how much Blueprint is used in the rest of the engine, because it is also used for actor blueprints, just Blueprint itself, essentially in level blueprints, they're obvious, but in anim blueprints. In Sequencer, you can actually embed Blueprint. In UMG, it's driven by Blueprint. Niagara has Blueprint in there, and the Variance Manager has Blueprint in there, just an example. And that's often overlooked. People think, oh, it's a scripting thing over here, that's cool, but no, it's very hard of the engine, it's everywhere.
So as the new systems come online, are you going to continue to build more schematics? Engine is growing constantly. Your thoughts? What's next?
That's our idea. We have to see how it goes, with all the other things we have to take care of, but that is definitely our idea. And the things that we're missing, there's 4 things that we're missing right now, big ones. So our goal for the year is to try to get those 4 done as well. Again, we'll see how it goes. I don't want to make a strong commitment here, but we're working on it. Networking in its entirety is missing. Mario, you started on that.
Oh
Yeah.
boy.
But it will take some time.
Yes.
Yes.
The other one missing is audio. So Christoph is working on that. What else do we have? UMG and UI is another big one. And
Niagara.
FX, Niagara, FX in general, I would say, is also
Yes.
missing. So I think those are the main 4 things that we're really missing here at the moment.
Wow.
But also we have to update, as you said, this is going the current, the ones we already have. We have to update these overviews, but the basing we can't commit.
Well, this is incredibly valuable, and I think that it's fortunate that we have the opportunity to look at this material in this kind of depth, and this will be on YouTube, and people will be able to go back and review this discussion. These usually come out on YouTube, 3 or 4 days after the stream. So, and once again, there's 8 hours of this content with Mario and Sjoerd, going through every one of these schematics, and describing them and opening the content up inside of a presentation that they did. When was that done? Earlier this in January.
That was January. That was
January.
fun. We did it in Cary at Epic HQ. So we were at HQ for something else, just chatting with a few people. So we were there the whole week, jet lagged as well. It's been a long week, and then here's 9 hours where we booked this room, and we're going to record it. You got 9 hours, no mistakes, just roll with it. So we went for it the whole day. That was one long take.
No mistakes.
While jet lagged after one long week, and we made it. I think we walked out of the building. We walked into the building at 8 in the morning, I think, and we walked out by 8 or so in the evening. So
I had the pleasure to see the rehearsrsal when yourself and Mario presented in Stockholm.
And
that was
Sjoerd
awesome.
doesn't drink coffee. Yeah, he's a vegetarian. So I don't even know how you stayed awake.
we managed.
Yes, we did.
Well, this has been great. Questions from our group in the chat. I'm sure you've got some questions for Sjoerd and Mario.
I'm gonna stop sharing, by the way.
There was a question about networking, which is going to make it in at some point. I think, Mario, you've been looking at that.
Yes, but as Charlotte said, we don't have a time frame for that.
Yep.
We hope it will be ready for the end of the year, but we can't commit for now. We have a lot of other things to attend to.
Looking back through questions.
Will networking include an overview of what's required for pixel streaming, distribution experiences, streaming via any of these? I guess it's out. There's so many features.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of features. One thing that we were light on, at least on the rendering one, for example, is mobile rendering. We're focusing on deferred. But yeah, there is just so many things all over. It's difficult to touch on every single one.
There was a question back there quite a while back, and difficult to find, but about camera systems.
Oh yeah, the
systems
camera
are already just a bit for character. So yeah, in the character topic, you can find some bits on camera.
Oh yeah, they're asking about Epic Online Services.
Yeah, probably I will cover that if I cover when covering. So yeah, sure, there will be some notes in our overview schematic regarding how to use and how to implement Epic Online Services with our with the architecture of the.
Yeah, so it's important to know that it would be primarily about the architecture of the networking features we have, and EOS ties into that. It's like a addition. It's a service that lives alongside of it that works with that.
Great. What else do we have from a question perspective?
Well, someone said 5% only. Yeah, maybe make it 20%. I don't know, 15. Depends on the game.
There is a mention of Linux. But that's not specific to Schematics, I don't think.
And so just to kind of recap, currently what we have available on it's up on our online learning website, which if you're not using it, use it. And it's currently there's 8 courses. So if you log in, you can search and just search Kickstart. That's how I find it. And there are 8 courses, and then there's also a learning path as well, correct? And I think you earn the badge for the learning path. Or are there individual badges for each one of the concentrations? But each one is like an intro and like an hour-long video. So, we say that there's 8 hours, but it's not like you've got to sit down and watch an 8-hour-long broken up. So there's that. But here soon we'll have the graphics as well, correct? At some point. And those will also be on the Unreal Online Learning. Is that correct?
What I'm not sure. What typically happens is there's a additional materials section. I don't know if that's where you'll hook. You have the courses section, description, and up there, courses.
I can see that there's a question regarding AI and deep learning. I cover AI on the character again, mainly behavior trees, blackboards, and environment query system and perceptions. Nothing regarding deep learning, because again, it's all about systems. Something that you can.
Another question there about rendering dependency graphs.
Know your RDGs?
No, in general, we're gonna focus on the 4 we're missing to begin with, I think. But at some point, I mean, there's additional rendering things coming in as well. Like ray tracing in itself, by the way, is just to pick something big. There's a few nodes left and right, but it's kind of like a tag on right now. There is a lot of stuff we can develop further, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Unreal is expanding so quickly. It's such a challenge for all of our documentation and all of our learning resources. Keep them up to date.
Yep.
Almost every part of the engine's active development or has, some sort of progression in, or there's a brand new feature coming out, ray tracing, everything from just little stuff that makes huge impacts that are really hard to cover. You mentioned variant management, the thing that is hugely important for people in that line of work. If you didn't know it, how would you ever know that it was there? Because it was in a release note.
The other thing, of course, is there's lots of other industries using Unreal now, and there are some parts that just don't make sense to games as such. I've had quite a lot of people speaking to me recently about DMX and sort of lighting control, external lighting control, stages, etc., which aren't core to the engine, but at some point they obviously hook into the same kind of graphs and diagrams we've been looking at.
Yeah, for a sense of perspective, how long did it take you to get to where you are with this material now? This took a fair amount of time to generate what we have.
When did we start? I mean, we started April,
January?
Maybe. No, before that even.
Oh yeah.
You score, but this off and on. We have a lot of other things going on, so that wasn't full time.
Yes.
And the initial approach, we didn't like it. We basically deleted all of it. So when did we start then again properly? When was that? Like July, I think, June.
Like redoing it, it was June. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in September we had the first version, kind of there.
we deliver it for the first time in September.
On a kind of a tangent, but speaking about the general project, I've been watching some documentaries because I'm stuck at home about the history of science, and one of the most important things for science is to codify things. So the first time you codify it, the first time you actually start writing out the way in which things work, is a really important step, because then you can start building and polishing and other people can understand it, and you've got a system to actually work with. And I think this is a huge step for that.
Yeah, and if you all in the stream have things that, as you go back and review this material and get a chance to get your head around it, if you haven't seen it at all, I'm scrolling here on the screen an email address that you can get a hold of all of us. So please feel free to reach out and give us some feedback on what you're seeing here in the stream, or if you've got additional feedback on the Kickstart project, and let us know what you think. If you are seeing material there that you'd like additional information about, or if you are like, hey, it would be nice if they did a whole section on, something that you didn't find there, please let us know. Send us an email at ueacademia@epicgames.com. And it comes to Tom and Mark and I, but we'll make sure it gets to Sjoerd and Mario and the rest of the team working on this content. We'll give an opportunity for maybe one question more, but if not, it's been a real pleasure to have Mario and Sjoerd on today's stream. Once again, this will all be collected and up on YouTube here in the next probably day or two, and you always can remember that you can always come back here on Twitch and review this video, where all the chat talk will be here as well. People are still mentally processing how it all works together, so that's good. We broke everyone's brain. We love that. That's one of our favorite things on Friday. And more than anything, we just really like to expose this kind of content because it's been on learn.unrealengine.com now for maybe 3 or 4 months, and I think it is one of the highest viewed pieces of content on our online learning. But still, if some of you haven't seen it, who have tuned in today, we want to make sure that you're well aware of it. We want to make sure that anyone who's teaching Unreal Engine is aware of how valuable this content is, and anyone who's learning Unreal Engine can use this to get their head around the breadth of the engine and the anatomy of Unreal, because I think it is a really good piece of content for that. And we're putting up the links again so that you can go directly to the learning path. Also be aware that you don't have to follow the learning path. You can go to the individual courses. So if you just want to go to animation, you just want to go to programming, you just want to go to blueprint, you can find those individually. So you don't have to follow specifically the learning path. You can go to the individual ones. I want to remind everyone that next Friday, we've got another really awesome live stream coming up. We've got Matt Workman, who will be joining us. For those of you who are not familiar with Matt, he is really an amazing virtual production developer who runs an amazing virtual production Facebook group. He probably has been one of the guys who's really engineered virtual production from the ground up, and is going to be sharing with us really a lot of the things that help virtual production developers understand how to access the hardware that is essential for virtual production. He also is the developer of Cinetracer. So for those of you who are not familiar, you can get Cinetracer, and it is really kind of like Fortnite Creative for filmmakers. Pretty amazing tool set. And he'll be on next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll be joining Tom and Mark and I to talk about virtual production and how it can be applied in a classroom environment. And then on June 5th, Linda Selheim will be back to join us for Unreal Engine and Twinmotion and Fortnite Creative for secondary education. So that'll be another amazing stream. So if there are no more further questions for today, I want to thank Sjoerd, and I want to thank Mario for joining us today. I know that it's later in the evening for more than half of us on the stream today, so probably you guys are ready for supper. And thank you all for joining us today on the stream. And hope you all have a safe and great weekend. And thank you all for joining us. And sorry if we had a couple of audio glitches. We will continue to refine our process.
Every week we will
Every week.
a new audio glitch to tackle until we have them all tackled.
Then we'll start again at the beginning.
Yeah, because we'll have forgotten how to fix that original. Like game development, but with an audio bus.
Yes,
Thank you all
exactly.
for coming. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Sjoerd.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mario.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
guys. Thank you all.